南无萨旦陀苏羯多耶阿拉诃帝三藐三菩提伽。
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 无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I've tried to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning. 南无大方广佛华严经，华严海会佛菩萨。南无大方广佛华严经，华严海会佛菩萨。Homage to the Buddha's Flower Garland Sutra of great expansive teachings and the ocean-wide flower garland assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Venerable Master, Dharma Masters, and friends in the Dharma, good evening. We apologize for being late today. We were caught in traffic on the Bay Bridge, so I didn't have time to go change my robes. Today we are continuing to explain the Flower or Dormant Sutra. And today Heng Sure, who is normally at our monastery in Burlingame, is here with us today. So we will share this discussion together. Last time we stopped on page 53, I believe. 52 and 53. In the middle section. So we can read this. We can read this whole section, although we may not have time to cover so much of it. Okay. 52页 Yeah. 复作是念，作是念，我当于众生中为首，
我当于众生中为首，
为圣，为殊胜，为妙，为微妙，为上，为无上，乃至为一切智智依止者。此菩萨若发勤精进，于一念请得千亿三昧，见千亿佛，知千亿佛神力，能动千亿佛世界，乃至示现千亿身，一一身示现千亿菩萨。Sorry, 是千亿菩萨，以为眷属。若以菩萨殊胜愿力，自在示现，过于此数百 百劫千劫，乃至百千亿那由他劫，不能数之。Okay, the English, we can read it together. On page 53, he also makes the following reflection. I should, among all living beings, be a leader, be supreme, be most supreme, be wonderful, be subtly wonderful, be superior, be unsurpassed, up to and including being one with the wisdom of all wisdom, upon whom others can rely. This bodhisattva, if he brings forth diligence and vigor, within a single thought attains 1,000 kodis of samadhis. He sees 1,000 kodis of Buddhas. He knows 1,000 kodis of Buddha's spiritual powers. He is able to quake of 1,000 kodis of Buddhas, up to and including being able to manifest 1,000 kodis of bodies, and with each and every body being able to manifest 1,000 kodis of bodhisattvas as his retinue. If he employs especially supreme power of bodhisattva vows to manifest at ease, he surpasses that number. In 100 kalpas, 1,000 kalpas, up to and including 100,000 kodis of nayutas of kalpas, the number could not be counted or known. That was a lot of Sanskrit words that we will explain them when we get to them. So we start with this phrase, or this sentence, where he makes a reflection. I should be a leader and be supreme, be most supreme, be wonderful. This whole passage, does anyone recognize this sentence from another part of the sutra? Have you seen this sentence before? Yes? Where? Yes, very good. This is the 5th time you have seen this sentence, if you've been following this, the 10 grounds chapter from the beginning. So, at the end of every one of the grounds, before the verses start, the Bodhisattva is reflecting that he should be a leader, he should be supreme and wonderful and unsurpassed. And actually, in all, there's 11 different things that he wants to be. But here it kind of summarizes it using the phrase up to and including. So I will just refresh it for you. According to Dharma Master Ceng Guan, who is also the commentator on the Avatamsaka Sutra, he says that these 11 phrases, the first 7 of them, which go from being a leader all the way to being unsurpassed, is this referring to the Bodhisattva's own virtue, that he should, because he is attaining and is embodying Bodhi or awakening. So he is in a very high and lofty position, and he has supreme qualities and abilities. And then the last 4, which only the last one is shown here, after unsurpassed, you can add in, these are the ones that were omitted or summarized. He also wants to be a guide, Dao, and also a general, Jiang, and also a commander-in-chief, which is Shuai. So, and then the last one is to be one with wisdom, the wisdom of all wisdom, upon whom others can be relied. So these 4 roles refer to his or hers wanting to teach and transform living beings. So after he has cultivated his own virtue to be very wonderful and supreme, the Bodhisattva will use that kind of virtue to teach and transform living beings. And he's repeating this at every single stage, the same kind of aspiration. But at every ground, the Bodhisattva's ability becomes more comprehensive and powerful. And so the Bodhisattva has more potential to help greater numbers of living beings. And later on, Heng Sure will kind of give a general framework of how it's increasing kind of exponentially. So first, I just wanted to say a little bit more about this, the being a leader is a leader in terms of not a political leader or a leader because of you have some kind of worldly power, but more because you have cultivated your own merit and virtue to be so abundant that you are basically radiant with this virtue, and you have purified yourself of all the kleshas, or nearly all the kleshas, the defilements, are also called afflictions. So you have a kind of self-mastery that comes from being free from afflictions and being having your innate wisdom shining forth. Then you want to be a guide, meaning you want to be able to guide living beings by explaining the Dharma, all the different nuances and the different levels of meaning of the Dharma in a correct manner, to lead living beings onto the path towards awakening, and to lead all beings to also be able to extinguish their own afflictions. And then the last one, the 一切智 is the wisdom of all wisdom, is the wisdom that comes from having transcended the worldly realm. So basically, it's at least Sravaka's wisdom. If we talk about 3 levels of wisdom, then this is the one that the Shravakas have attained. And then this means the Bodhisattva can lead all beings to also awaken to that wisdom. And we should, for me, I would think, well, this is maybe very far from where I am, yet I think we can also make this aspiration that we want to be able to emulate the Bodhisattva, to also be able to free ourselves from our troubles and afflictions, which keep us from realizing our inherent wisdom. And we want to be able to use that wisdom, to discover it and use it to be a positive influence on other beings and work towards peace in the world and helping the society. Recently I was looking at Venerable Master Hua and also Venerable Master Shuring's talks on Dharma, and they both said something that was basically putting Buddhism in a nutshell. And they were saying that basically the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, are about peace. It's nothing more than bringing peace to your own heart and to the world. And peace equals Buddhism, and Buddhism equals peace. And indeed, if we look in the history of Buddhism, we will see in each age some person who comes out and becomes a leader that works towards peace. And this peace starts within one's own heart. When the Bodhisattva has cultivated to have purity of moral purity through the precepts, and then samadhi, or clear concentration and calm clarity, and then through that the wisdom inherent in them shines forth, then they will be totally at peace and not attached to our normal concepts of who we are and what our self is, and not be afraid of death even. So then they will be able to do some really tremendous things. And there are these leaders who have kept the teaching and also the Sangha, the community that embodies the teaching, alive since the Buddha's time. and not only keeping it alive, but also bringing it to different parts of the world, from India to China, for example, and then Korea and Japan and Taiwan, Tibet, and the West. So last semester, I was taking a class on art history and had to do a paper, and I wanted to do it on something related to Buddhism. So I asked my professor, is there anything related to the Shurangama Sutra that is also related to visual culture, which was the topic of the class? And she said, actually, yes. There was this painter in the Ming Dynasty who painted the 25 sages part of the Shurangama Sutra, and you could go and research that. And she said she was very curious to know why in the Ming Dynasty the Shurangama Sutra became so popular, and why he would want to paint this part of the sutra. And what is more, he painted it, when you're painting it, it's almost like you're making a commentary on it, or you're translating the sutra into images. And he, of course, had his own interpretation in there too. So something very interesting and perhaps upsetting to some people is that he depicted many of the sages who were mostly monastics in lay appearances. For example, Ananda. Well, actually, Venerable Ananda, he added into there. He also changed the membership of the 25 sages a bit, but he added Bodhidharma and Ananda and Amitabha Buddha. But in the end, I would say that my conclusion was, from an enlightened point of view, it's not just 25 sages anyways, and he was trying to adapt it to his times. So then I learned a little bit more about what was happening with Buddhism in the late Ming Dynasty in the early 1600s. At that time, actually, the lay Buddhist movement was arose, and there was a lot of people who wanted to be vegetarian. There was a lot of liberating life ceremonies, and reciting the Buddha's name was very popular. But that didn't mean that the Sangha was also very flourishing. Actually, the Sangha had declined a lot, and it was partly due to external forces, like the government was restricting monasteries. They had these registrations for monasteries, and you were either a Chan monastery or a teaching monastery. You lectured on sutras, or originally there was the Vinaya monastery, where you study the moral monastic discipline, the precepts. But then the first emperor of Ming, changed that. He said, "Oh, the Vinaya is not important. Let's change that and put in the kind that goes and Ganjing Can, and basically does the funeral services. That's really important for the people, that there are these monks that go out and recite sutras when people die." So, and he gave them the most power and the most freedom to move around, and the other ones, like the Chan monks, had to stay in their monastery. They couldn't leave. So then it really changed the nature of monastic Buddhism. And of course the precepts fell into a low-key position, and were not emphasized so much. So and also the government controlled the ordinations, and they were the ones who gave out the ordination certificates and decided who could receive ordination. And that was at first to control the quality of who became a Sangha member. But when the government fell on bad times and they needed to raise funds for famine relief and disaster relief, they would sell the ordination certificates to anyone who could afford them. There was no training involved, and you could just become a monastic if you had enough money to buy a certificate. So then a bunch of people entered the Sangha that were not educated in the Dharma or in the precepts, and didn't have any motivation to do what a monastic monk or nun is supposed to do, which is to really cultivate and seek awakening. Rather, they were just interested in making money through doing funeral services or getting good offerings. So it was a very sad state. And also in the Chan school, the Chan monks this is very generally speaking, they thought that it was enough to just memorize koans or their meditation topics and kind of some clever words to say if you were questioned about your koan, and that it wasn't important to do any kind of physical labor or to seek for any wise teachers to guide you to awakening. And so they didn't pay attention to the precepts, to what they were supposed to do. And also they became distracted by more secular activities or literati activities like calligraphy and different kinds of things, writing poetry. Not all of it was bad, but it was to the detriment of their cultivation. So fortunately, just in a time like this, there would be some great masters, 4 particular ones who came out and really tried to reform monastic Buddhism and also to invigorate the lay Buddhist movement. And these included Han San Dashi and Zibo Dashi, Oyi Dashi, and Lian Chi Dashi or Zhu Hong Dashi. So, for example, Han San Dashi and Zibo Dashi, they went to the temple of Nanhua Si, the 6 patriarchs monastery, and they found people selling meat in the courtyard, meat vendors. And so they, of course, quickly chased them out, or Han San Dashi did, chased them out and reformed the Sangha there. And he also helped to print and circulate the Tripitaka, the Buddhist canon, because of course if people had no access to the canon, it would be hard to study the Dharma. Especially the Tripitaka was not widely circulating in the more rural areas. And they worked hard to revive the ancient monasteries and especially the Sangha, the rules that the Sangha held, the discipline and the resolve to cultivate in these monasteries. And they themselves were true ascetic cultivators. However, they also ran into trouble with the authorities. So at one point, Great Master Hansan was exiled and basically asked to return to lay life and do labor, and banished to the south for quite a while. And even worse, Zibo Dashi was thrown in prison and beaten until he finally passed away sitting in meditation. But they did, a great thing to keep Buddhism alive, and in the late Ming Dynasty, that was 1600s. But 300 years later, when Great Master Xu Ying, during his time, it was a sad state again. And again, all these monasteries like Nanhua Si was in decline, and the Sangha was they had no teachers to teach them about the rules. So there was a lot of unwholesome things and corruption and just non-practice going on. So last week, if you were here, you heard Jing Fansi talk a little bit about Xu Ying Lao He Sang and how he was treated by during the communist time, but basically not. So I guess the reason I'm sharing his story is because to me it's very inspiring. It really inspires me to be vigorous and strong when I feel a little lazy or just powerless sometimes to overcome my own habits. And to me it shows the power of how just even working hard on your own habits, it can really help you progress, and then eventually it can develop into something like what they embodied, the power to emanate peace and well-being to the world. As you may know, Master Xu, which you can, maybe you have all read his biography, but it's also published in English. And he had an autobiography that was basically dictated to his disciples at their request in the very end of his life, after he had been nearly killed by I guess they say thugs. I don't know. So, but in the early years, he cultivated very bit ascetically in the mountains and very seriously. But later in life, he was quite influential in the political and social areas. For example, at the end of the Qing dynasty, the Empress Dowager asked his advice many times, and he also helped her to escape when the Qing Empire fell. And Chiang Kai-shek also went to him many times for advice and also made offerings and helped to support monasteries rebuilding. And then there was conflict between Tibet and the Republic of China at that time, and he helped to mediate to avoid their going to actual war. And so it was peacefully resolved. And also there was when the Japanese forces were occupying the southern area and there was going to be conflict with the local villages, his virtue allowed it to be peaceful. So I'm giving all of these as examples of how the Bodhisattva serves as a leader and serves as a guide and someone that others can rely upon, which is part of the sutra text. He also started a school for poor children while he was renovating the Nanhua Si, the Nanhua Monastery of the Sixth Patriarch. And there were many famines during those times of his life. So often he would tell his monastery, everyone, there would be hundreds or even 1,000 monks in the monastery. And he would say, everybody eat less. And we're going to save the money or save the food and give it to the people who were starving outside on the street. When people gave him offerings, maybe thousands of dollars, which in those days was worth a great deal, he would sometimes give it all away for famine relief. And sometimes even open the doors of the monastery for refugees fleeing from the war. And at one point, it was Japanese bombers were flying overhead the monastery and dropping bombs. But what his response was just to sit in meditation in the Buddha hall. And then, fortunately, the bombs did not drop on any buildings. They just dropped far enough away that nobody was killed. On a religious level, Master Xu restored or revived the 5 lineages of the Chan school, many of them which had been long broken. And he did a lot of this activity in quite elderly years, you could say. He was 95 when he restored Nanhua Monastery in Canton. And after he was done with that, working for several years, he went to seek the Ringmen sect founder's temple. And he found it in a dense thicket in the woods. It was dilapidated and abandoned. He was so sad that he cried, and he resolved at age 104 to restore that temple. And of course, by that time, he was so well respected that any project he wanted to take on, there would be a bunch of people coming over to help him, whether they were monastics or lay people. So he was able to restore that temple as well. Then at 110 years old, he went to Hong Kong and gave a bunch of Dharma lectures and held, meditation and recitation retreats. And many thousands of people took refuge with him. And they also, asked him, please stay in Hong Kong. It's really unsafe in the mainland. It's very unstable right now. It's dangerous. Don't go back there. And so many people, you have so many disciples here now, they want you to teach them the Dharma. What was his response? He said, I there are other people who can teach Dharma here in Hong Kong. My responsibility is especially to the mainland because it's so dangerous there right now, and there are tens of thousands of monks and nuns there that are their situation is getting more and more dangerous. And if I don't go back, actually for my personal, in my mind, going or staying doesn't really matter to me, but if I stay here, then who is going to look after all those monastics? And he just said, I feel the responsibility, I must go back. And then, indeed, 2 years later, when he was 112, in 1951, when he had just finished basically renovating Renmin Monastery, about 100 thugs came around and invaded the monastery and said, we hear you have hidden away gold and silver and ammunition and radio transmitters, and give them all up. And then they, well, I don't need to go into all the details of this, but basically it was quite life-threatening because after they had locked up all the monastics, which hundreds or some, in the Chan Hall and the Dharma halls and so forth, and questioned them, and then basically killed some of them. They couldn't get any answer or any supplies out of them because they didn't have any. So then they came to vent their anger on Master Shuring, who was 112, and they beat him with wooden sticks, and then still didn't get any, positive answer, and beat him with iron or metal sticks, rods, until basically breaking his ribs, and he was bleeding in his head, and they left him for dead. But basically he had sat in meditation and entered samadhi. So after they left the room he was locked up in, his disciples came and, put him on a bed and took care of him for a little while. A few days later they came back and saw he was still alive. They got so angry and they beat him again 4 times and left him for dead again. And then again he survived. And then at the very end, after the 3rd really terrible beating, when any ordinary person who was even much, much younger would have died, he gradually came back and then told his disciples about his vision of going to the Tushita heaven and getting instructions from Maitreya Bodhisattva, and seeing. Anyways, that's last week you heard about this. Jing Fanshi talked about. So he said he thought he was just in samadhi for a few minutes, or he didn't. His body took the beating, but his mind was at peace. So he had that state, just like probably Hansan Dasi and Zibo Dasi had that kind of state that allowed them to be able to do these kinds of tremendous things that were, giving up their physical well-being, but able to maintain serenity of mind, being able to have a mind that didn't dwell anywhere. And then at age 113, he recovered slightly and he led a vigorous Chan session, and then the authorities from Beijing telegraphed him 4 times asking him to go. His disciples all said, please wait, you are in no state after having been beaten so severely to travel all the way to Beijing from the south. But he said, no, I have to go because I see that the Sangha is like a pile of loose sand with nobody to lead them. And I have a responsibility. Again, he had this really great sense of responsibility for the whole Sangha to go set up a strong organization to keep Buddhism flourishing or alive. So he went there, and then with several other monks and lay people reestablished the Chinese Buddhist Association, which is still active now. And at the same time, he petitioned the government for freedom of religion and for the government to be no longer demolish any more Buddhist temples or take away any more land, to preserve the temples that were left, and to return enough land to the monastery so that they could farm and produce things and be self-sufficient, because under this changed political circumstances, it was no longer a traditional society where people would make offerings to the Sangha or so much, or that they could count on another way of livelihood. They would have to support themselves more. So his monasteries all have this ethic of everyone has to go down to the farm and work and produce things and support ourselves, and we're not going to rely on other people. And we're good. It's part of cultivation, just hard work. And I think when he was 109, that's when our teacher, Master Hua, went to pay his respects and received the Dharma transmission. And of course, he planned on having our master stay to help him restore monasteries in China. But our teacher had gone to Hong Kong and was planning to go back, but didn't go back when he wanted him to go back. So he said, I'm going to take care of a few more things in Hong Kong and then I'll come back. But then because of the war, the road got cut off, and he was no longer able to go back. And a few years later, Master Shuying entered nirvana, and our teacher, of course, felt very regretful. And yet, both of them had received visions from the sixth patriarch that for him, for Master Shuying, it was that it's time for him to go back, meaning to go, I guess, to Nanhua Si and restore the monastery and also the rest of the ancient monasteries. And then to our Master Hua, it was like, your task is to go to the West and to bring the Dharma to the West. And so I think we saw the same kind of spirit in our teacher, that he would forget his body for the sake of the Dharma, working until he would, basically drop, but not minding it at all. I would ask him, you must be so tired. And he would say, I just don't think about it. I don't think about myself. Because if I did, I wouldn't get anything done. So you could see it's kind of comfort, a little bit of physical comfort versus doing something for the Dharma to nourish your spiritual well-being, your Dharma body. We might say, oh, I need to take a rest, I'm so tired. Or, of course we want to follow the middle way. I'm not advocating that people should all become extreme workaholics or cultivation holics or something, but just that there is this level where these great masters have they really don't think about their physical body so much, and their mind is completely focused 100% on the Dharma and their responsibility for the Dharma, and that actually lets them survive and be well despite going through incredible, physically maybe difficult or traumatizing circumstances. So, and then since I only saw the master in the last 5 years of his life, and not, every day, I think we also see traces of it in his disciples, his senior disciples. And to this, day, I can witness our senior disciples, how they will really push themselves, without even thinking of how much they're committing to, because their main goal is just for the Dharma. And it's really inspiring to me. So I hope that we can all take some responsibility, take some inspiration, and say we can all have some responsibility to help the Dharma in our own ways, to cultivate it first ourselves, and to understand it, and then to share it with others. And in our own ways, we will contribute to peace. So I'm going to stop here and then let Heng Sure talk a little bit, and we can go on to the next line or not?
Actually, it's better don't stop. Heng speak very good. So I will talk about what I prepared today, only today, and Heng will translate for me better, okay, fluently. 那我今天呢，可以因为根据这个经文提到，因为英法师跟我说可以讲一些关于禅的。那刚好我看到智慧之源呢，这次出到上人所开发智慧之门，那是在1987年5月16号开示。那这个时候应该不是在禅期的时候，那这一段我跟大家先念给大家听然后等下我们跟经文，然后有一些关联的连在一起。那他说修行就是这个做禅是很重要的，上人说，因为他最主要就是说开发智慧，我们要多做禅。那像我们出家人呢，主要比较特别的呢，我们学的戒律就是比较要学多一点戒律。那戒律的一个总结呢，就是说我们常常做三明尼的时候都很记得因戒生定，因定发慧。所以戒呢，还有做禅呢，跟智慧都有很大的关联。
Okay, so she says that she will share a little bit from a talk by the Venerable Master given during a Chan session, and it's talking about how there's this from Chan, sitting in meditation, which is Chan or Zen meditation, we can develop our wisdom, and then by holding the precepts, we can develop our meditation or our concentration. So it's a cycle of precepts to developing concentration, developing wisdom.
那师父说呢，他说修行是要返本还原，那开发我们本有的智慧障况。然后开发出来呢，就会真正明白到极点呢，就是佛了。OK， 然后佛呢跟凡夫没有很大的分别，所以不同的地方就是佛是大智慧者。那我顺便跟大家说呢，上人呢常跟我们说，他说我跟你们是一样的，我有一点不一样呢，就是刚刚英法师。他讲了很多，说上人都会忘记他的身体然后为法忘躯。那他常常有一句话呢，是我们大家都应该都听过他说的：我跟你们大家不一样的就是无我，他是没有我的，就是这个不同而已。
So then, if we want to return to our original source, and to open up the mind of our own wisdom, then we will be able to gain true understanding, and if we have true understanding to the utmost degree, then we are Buddhas. Buddhas and ordinary people are really not different. The only difference is that the Buddhas have uncovered their great wisdom. And just like the Venerable Master would tell us that I'm not any different than you, the only difference is that I have no self, no sense of self. I forget he would forget himself for the sake of the Dharma. 那我回到这个经典里头呢，就是智慧的那种表现有层次的。要是我们修戒修得多深呢，还有我们修定有多深的那个层次呢，就看我们那个智慧的表现有多不同。那怎么不同呢？就是跟今天我们这段经文有关系。我们这段经文呢，就是说，他说此地菩萨嘛，就是说这个，我们今天就是到就是
讲到这个第五地的菩萨嘛哈，他能够每一个经文每一地都是同样的，都有重复这个说可以见到多少佛。OK， 那我们温习一下哈，就从初地的时候呢，他可以看到100尊佛。那100尊佛为什么初地可以看到100尊，二地可以1000，然后三地可以100千，然后四地可以看到1尊的佛，然后五地呢就可以看到1000亿尊的佛，然后第六地呢可以看到10万亿，然后七地呢可以看到10万亿那由他，然后八地呢可以看到100万3000大千世界为成数，那九地呢可以看到100万阿僧祇国度为成数，那么多的佛。到第10地呢可以看到不可说100千亿那由他佛刹为成数，那么多的佛。虽然这个数字好像很陌生哦，但是念一念给大家听，那我们下来的经文呢都会重复的讲到。
So basically now we go back to the sutra text, and through the 10 grounds you can see that as the Bodhisattva develops his level of concentration, the profundity of his concentration, then he will, the wisdom that he embodies will also deepen. And so then you can see this in the difference at each ground. For example, here on the 5th ground, it says that he can see 1,000 kotis of Buddhas, and a koti is generally translated as yi in Chinese, which is 100 million. So he can see 1,000, 100 million Buddhas. Now, back in the 1st ground, it says that he can see 100 Buddhas. And then the 2nd ground, it goes to 1,000 Buddhas. And then 3rd ground is 100,000 Buddhas. And the 4th ground is 100 million Buddhas. And the 5th ground is 100 billion Buddhas. And then it's 10 trillion in the 6th ground. And then 7th ground is 10 trillion nayutas, nayutas being a huge number in Indian math. And then the 8th ground is as many motes of dust as there are in a trichiliocosm, which is like a whole universe. And then the 9th ground, it's like a million asankhyajas, which isn't like nearly an uncountable number. And then the 10th ground is 10 trillion nayutas of the dust motes in 10th trillion nayutas of Buddha lands. So basically it blows your mind.
那经文上就是说呢，你那个这个五地的菩萨哈，那个南圣地呢，他也可以知道，刚刚数字那个哈，一个个层次上的那个佛的神力，那他也可以动多少个佛的世界，刚刚那个数字哈，从初地到10地套进去的，然后呢，他也可以过，就是说经过那么多的佛的世界，也能够照，它可以照耀哈，因为它光明嘛哈，持戒光明，然后有定力、有智慧，可以照耀多少佛的世界，也能够教化多少世界的众生，然后也能够祝寿多少劫，很长，越来越长的，因为修的越深的话，祝寿的劫数越长久，他也能够知道过去、现在、未来的东西，那个长度哈就越来越深、越长的那种事情。然后他也知道那个法门呢，也可以入更多的法门，不是光是知道禅宗或者戒律而已，他都知道所有的法门就越深越广。然后他也可以视线呢，这个就很重要，他可以视线就是刚刚类似的那个数量的身体。那这段就很重要了。那最主要呢，他视线，他可以划线那么多的菩萨做他的眷属，然后他的功用是什么呢？就是要度化我们这些凡夫众生，去发菩提心，然后离苦得乐，乃至于跟他同等成佛的。这个就是这 菩萨们修行他们的用意，背后那个用意很重要，就是要度化众生。
So the same number that we talked about, how many Buddhas and how many samadhis they can attain, which at this ground is 1,000 kotis or 10 billion. You also use this number to say this is the number of spiritual powers that he knows, the Buddha's spiritual powers, and he's able to quake the world systems of 1,000 kotis of the Buddhas, and also to manifest that many bodies, and each of those bodies is able to make appear that many bodhisattvas, and all the purpose of which is to teach and transform living beings, to bring forth the commitment to seek awakening and to end their own suffering and to become Buddhas themselves. And also it talks about this number for how long they will live, how many eons they will live, and how they will be able to enter this many Dharma doors, and so forth.
那我们说一个比较实际上的例子哈，就是刚刚英法师也举了好多个高僧，大德。那最靠近我们的高僧呢，就是谁呀？
上人。
就是我们的师父嘛哈。我们的师父呢，大家都很清楚，有一个公案哈，那是关于金山，就是三藩市有一位华清帮的帮主哈，他很就是他以前干很多坏事的，然后他们10个人哈，就到圣城的时候呢，那师父就把他们度化学佛了哈，皈依三宝，不再拿枪。不再打抢银行，不再杀人放火。那上人怎么度化他们呢？因为习气很难改。那等他们回到三藩市的时候呢，那就有个诱惑，让他那个头就很想再买一些，就是那些武器嘛哈，那些枪炮的东西。那后来呢，上人怎么度化他呢？那上人就入他们的梦里头，不是入一个，10个人都入他们的梦里头。那我听我的师兄呢，曾经跟我说过，他说，有时我们众生啊，难调难服哈，那面对面的时候教化你是听不懂的，他一定要等你入梦的时候教化你是什么呢？我这位师兄解释得很好，他说，因为我们在梦里头梦的时候呢。就是没有第6识嘛，哈，没有那个分别意识，就是在那个就是在8识里头，就是6识跟7识降的最低的时候，你在8识的时候，所以圣人呢就可以入到你的梦教化你，你就比较会听话。那个，所以这10位呢，他们就在梦里头就听话了，然后就不再买那个 weapon， 就是不再买那些枪炮的，然后他真的放下了。然后就把它都丢到那个金山，就是金山桥的那个海里头去。然后这个上人呢，就是同时可以入10个人的梦。那这10个呢，师兄弟呢，他们就是醒来的时候，互相就说了：“哎，你也做了这个梦，他也做了那个梦，他也做了一个梦。”那就是这个 function， 就是这个圣者他有这个能力去化现，就像我们经文上说的一样，他就化进他的梦里头去度化众生，这是一个很实际的例子。
So I'm going to give an example of how the Buddhas or the Bodhisattvas make appear different bodies to teach and transform. So as you know, our teacher had a disciple who was a former member of the Huaqing Bang, which is the China youth gang back in the 60s or 70s. And at that time, they were very much powerful. They were very powerful in Chinatown, and they committed murder and arson and had a lot of weapons. So, but our teacher was able to teach and transform them, so that all 10 of them went to the city of 10,000 Buddhas and became his disciples. And however, even after that, they were still tempted to, at one point, there was a really good deal to buy some weapons, and they were really tempted to go get them. But then Master Hua, this is how he taught them. He went into their dreams, because some living beings, they are really stubborn, and it's hard to teach them face to face. They won't listen. So you have to wait till they're in their dream, their sixth consciousness, which is their discriminating, their conscious mind is kind of latent or inactive. And at that time, they will listen, and it will go into their subconscious. So when they woke up, he didn't just enter one person's dream. All 10 of them had the same dream. When they woke up, they all said, hey, I dreamed this. Oh, I dreamed this too. So then they all decided, okay, let's all toss our weapons over the Golden Gate Bridge. So they got rid of it, and they changed their lives. So this is the function of a sage, an awakened being. They are able to appear in many different forms to transform living beings.
那我再回到来上人讲禅的那个部分哈，上人说我们信佛呢不需要求神通妙用，这个很重要哈。然后刚刚我们听的这么是上人是修行的那个果嘛哈，那我们本身呢学佛就不要求这个神通妙用，三身四肢也不要求，五眼六通不求，只要你只需要信佛的智慧。我们人人本具有这种智慧，不仅是佛才有，而是人人本身具备之条件。佛呢，只要指出一条路，我们就借助这条路去走，去开发本有的智慧矿。那什么路呢？
So going back to the Venerable Master's Chan instructions, he says that in practicing Chan meditation, we shouldn't be seeking after psychic powers or special abilities. Just now we told this story about his being able to appear in people's dreams. This is the resulting function of his practice. But when we are practicing, we don't try to seek after this kind of results. He says we don't need to seek after having the 3 bodies, which the 4 kinds of wisdom, or the different kinds of psychic or spiritual powers. Instead, all we need to do is trust in the wisdom of the Buddha, trust that we have this same wisdom innately within ourselves. Every single person has the innate wisdom of a Buddha within themselves. The Buddha simply pointed out the path, and if we can follow it, then we will be able to open up the treasury or the mine of our own wisdom.
最后就是他说那个路子怎么呢？那我们上人常常说，你们心里有数吗？那是什么路子能够让我们走回我们的返本还原我们的佛性呢？有没有这个底呢？
Does anyone know what this path is that will lead us back to our own wisdom?
我相信每个人都有，但是呢，我们上人讲的很彻底的，他就是也跟今天的经文很有关系。他说呢，我们万佛城的6大宗旨，对吗？那个不争、不贪、不求、不自私、不自利、不打妄语，这个也是戒律的根本。假如你做到呢，上人说下句是什么？成佛有余嘛，哈。所以呢，就是那句呢，也是跟今天经文很有关系嘛，哈。那你看我们第一个欢喜地哈，就是为什么他可以修到这个层次呢？因为我们经文上都有说到十地品，欢喜地呢，他专修什么？他专修什么？布施。然后第2地呢，离垢地呢，持戒。然后第3发光地呢，人布施持戒忍辱。然后第4地宴会地呢，精进。对吗？然后今天的那个南圣地呢 ？No， samadhi 对了，禅定嘛哈。然后再下来呢，我们下来的现前地呢是修什么的 ？Vajra 对，智慧。然后呢，那个是慧哈。然后它跟最后一地的实，它是法云地是智，是有一点不同的哈。怎么不同呢？它1跟6的6 paramita 哈，那个是凡圣都共修的哈，就根据那个阿含经那边有提到的。然后呢，到第7、8、9、10呢，就是都是这些圣人修的。然后7地呢是修远行地哈，它可以到处去度化众生，很自在无碍的。那因为它修方便，这个方便呢，简单的来说呢，我们常有句话说，你常给人家方便，有没有？这个是很简单的，都不障碍别人。这个是我们生活上的那个方便，就常让别人方便哦。那个，然后第8的不动地呢，就是方便到愿，就是发愿的愿，你要常发愿，就好像离世间品哈，他200个。就是200个问题，普贤菩萨给了他回答，什么是佛法的，什么，他回答了每一个问呢都有10个嘛，总共有2000个问题。这个就是愿，每一个愿一共有2000个愿，那么多，就是教我们发愿。假如你要修这个呢，去看离世间品哦，学修。然后到第9地的时候呢，就是力量的力，就是因为修所有的8度、9度、10度，它就产生了一个力量，这个很殊胜的力量。然后到第10地的时候，就智慧生出来了，就达到最后上人说的开发这个本有的智慧。然后我们所具足的那个功能呢，就是主要就是去度化众生，是无我的。假如有我是达不到这个功用的。
So the path that the Buddha pointed out, it can be summarized very simply. Our teacher put it as the 6 principles, which are no fighting, no greed, no seeking, no selfishness, no pursuing personal advantage, and no lying. Did I miss one? That's right? Okay. So these are basically the foundation for the precepts. And they're also, if you can actually practice these 6 things, then you have more than what it takes to become a Buddha. And this also ties into all of the 10 grounds. The first ground is the ground of happiness, and on that ground the Bodhisattva cultivates the perfection of giving or generosity. And then on the second ground, which is leaving defilement, he cultivates the precepts, holds the precepts. On the third ground, the Bodhisattva cultivates patience. On the fourth ground, she cultivates vigor. And the fifth ground, it's this ground, cultivating dhyana or samadhi, is concentration, meditative concentration. And then on the sixth ground is prajna, wisdom. And then when we get to the 10th ground, again, there is this knowledge or wisdom. But it's different from the 6th one, because the 1st through the 6th are cultivated by both ordinary and sages, ordinary beings and sages, whereas the 7th through 10th qualities, perfections, are only cultivated by the sages. So the 7th ground is traveling far. That's the name of the ground, and the Bodhisattva cultivates expedient means or skillful means, because he is able to go around and teach beings, and has practiced always making it convenient and easy for others, and never giving them any trouble or obstructions. So this is the perfection of skillful or expedient means. The 8th ground is called not moving, just being unmoving. And on that ground is the cultivation of vows So for vows, one can also look in the chapter 38 of the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is called the chapter of leaving the world or transcending the world. And in there, somebody asks 200 questions, and then there are 10 answers to each question. So there's 2,000 vows in all that are enumerated in there. And then the ninth ground, one cultivates the perfection of power, or one has supreme power. And then the 10th ground, oh yeah, right. We already talked about the 10th ground. It's this wisdom that is cultivated by sages, and basically these 7th through 10th are really possibly can only be cultivated because one has already gotten rid of the sense of self.
最后结论，我就是想起上人每次做事情的时候，那他真的是无我，因为有句话一句话就盖过他的意思，就是这一生给我，像英法师跟我们两位是同时遇到上人的，就是同一个期间，我们遇到师父呢，然后跟着他学习。那他有句话我永远记在心里，他说我什么都不要，那个他什么都不要，对吗？上人他到处弘法因为我从马来西亚开始见上人的时候，那他什么都不要了，但是他做佛事呢，把所有的道场都建立起来了。但是他什么都不留名不留利 ，OK， 他个人都没有的，但是他很用心的去做。他用心的做呢，就是靠他后面那句话呢，他说我什么都要，那个就很用心。那所以乃至到今天呢，我就看到我们每个人做事的时候，假如我呢今天为了我一点点有那个我的话我对那件事情会不用心。假如我没有我的话我什么都不要的话，但是呢我什么也要的话，为佛教的话，我会做得很用心，但是我也什么都不要了。然后从这里呢，我就看，那我希望我自己本身开始可以学习到这一点，就是很诚心、很用心的为佛法呢、佛教呢去做一点事情，跟在我们师父的尾巴，拉着他的袈裟跟着走。那就是因为他是大菩萨嘛OK， 今天我就跟大家结法缘到这里，阿弥陀佛。
So, the Venerable Master, from what both of us observed, because we kind of met him around the same time, is that he really had no self, no sense of self. And he did say, there's really nothing, I don't want anything. Nevertheless, when he was working for the Buddha Dharma and creating places of practice, you could say that he worked completely, put himself into the work, and he didn't want any name or benefit from it. But when working for the Dharma, you could say his attitude became, I want everything, meaning I want everything for the Dharma. And so this is the kind of attitude I would like to emulate. I have noticed for myself that if I'm doing something for my own benefit, then I find that I won't really be able to put myself 100% into the work. Whereas if I'm doing something for Buddhism at large, then I actually, at the same time, will want nothing for myself, but want everything for Buddhism, and I will be able to really throw myself into the work full-heartedly. And so this is what I hope to be able to develop, this kind of attitude, and more as a constant state of mind, and to follow after our teacher by basically hanging on to the tail of his robe. So that's what I'd like to share. We are basically at time since we started late. Are there any questions or comments before we conclude? Yes. Okay, maybe we'll see if that's. I don't know if you will enjoy it because it's basically not very orthodox. He did a very creative interpretation of the 25 sages. So he was also a very upright person and a very devout Buddhist, you could say. And he was trying to use his paintings to cross over lay people, because at that time the Sangha was in such a state that really they didn't have much respect. And lay people who were sincere Buddhists and wanting to cultivate tended not to want to join the monastery. And so he was trying to let them know that, you can cultivate even in your beautiful garden, or, the lay people had, very nice houses, but he said, these are also way places you can cultivate in there. So he put the sages into these settings to let them know that instead of just enjoying the flowers in your garden, you can be practicing there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, also a question for Dharmaster In. Because you spoke about how these great masters go into the secular world and help the world. And connected to that, because I know you've been in school pretty much since August. I was wondering if you could share any reflections on your encounter with that secular world, coming from like 20 years of monastic training.
Oh. I think just in a very short summary, going to school has been a very, very positive experience, in the sense that I've been in a monastery setting for a couple decades, and then coming in more contact with people in the outside world makes me appreciate a lot more both the suffering or the hardship of people, ordinary people, in the world, and also their concerns, and that I'm, basically not different from them. We're all maybe ordinary people working on our own problems and afflictions and trying to find peace. And it also makes me really, really cherish the Dharma as what I think is the most direct way to attain that peace. I see a lot of goodness in people in the world, even in the people who live on the streets. There's a lot of ethics in people, and a lot of caring, and I also see a lot of good examples of people doing good work. I mean, today we only mentioned really lofty, great, enlightened masters, but there's also people in Berkeley. The other day I was reading about somebody who is a PhD student at Berkeley, but he also started the first charter school in Berkeley, and his name is Victor Diaz, and he himself was kicked out of high school and told never to come back when he was 17. But after that, he went on to get a master's in education. And he came back and he said, the school system isn't serving everybody. Some people have so much trouble in their lives that they're not able to fit into the system. And each year they just fall farther and farther behind and are made to feel less and less, successful. So he started this charter school where basically it's creative, it's innovative, it's taking every person from where they are and developing their talents and their interests. And I don't have all the, he gave a TED talk, you can look it up, to share the experience. And he basically, if you don't mind staying 5 more minutes, I can tell you one story from his talk. He said when he first started this school, it's a middle school and high school, I think he started with taking over a continuation school first or something. And then the principals from the public schools all told him, oh, watch out for this one student who is been kicked out of all of these other schools. He's a real troublemaker. And he's like, oh, okay. So then the first day of school, he goes there early, and he's about to get ready to start the day. And a boy comes and says, could you unlock the bathroom for me? And he says, okay. And he just took out his whole chain of keys with all the keys to the whole school and tossed it to him and said, here, you go open it yourself. And then later he said, I don't even know if he's a student from my school. But then he said, the guy came back and said, oh, I opened the girls' room for you too. And he's like, okay, thanks. He seemed like a really nice guy. He said, what's your name? Vinny. He said, oh, that was the guy that he had been warned about. And he looked up his records, and there was all this, trouble, detention, and suspension reports. And but then he says this is the least of what he does is to trust people with his keys. He does a lot more outrageous things, but just in general, he gives them full trust, and then they really act differently than when they've been labeled and seen through lenses that of troublemaker and failure and so forth. So when it came time, though, for him to graduate, he wasn't ready. He couldn't graduate. So he had to sit down and tell Vinny, you're not going to be able to graduate. So what are you going to do? And he said, well, I think I'll maybe go find a job. I don't know. And he says, no, I want you to stay another year. And Vinny was like, you would keep me? So, he did. And he, I guess, turned out doing well. And I saw one of the innovative things that they're doing is, I guess it's a project-based curriculum. So people find research projects that they're interested in according to, anything. And then they work the skills into it. So one of the things they're doing is building classrooms. They design the classroom, and then they build it. And then that's how they're building the school. Maybe, have any of you seen the school or heard of it? You've been there?
I haven't been inside, but I passed next to the building.
Oh.
It's nice from outside, but I can see they are in the middle of building up.
Right. And then another key aspect of their mission is mindfulness. So they actually have, I think, meditation and yoga teachers there. Yeah. There's a lot of good things going on in the world, actually. India recently said that dolphins, they didn't legally say dolphins are like people, but dolphins have a lot of intelligence and sensitivity and human-like qualities, so therefore they should not ever be captive and be made to perform for people. So things like that. Well, one more plug for, recently last November I went to Taiwan. Did I already talk about this? I don't know. Went to Taiwan and saw this wonderful documentary called Kanjian Taiwan about, it's a person who made a documentary after being a highway engineer who had to use a helicopter to fly over Taiwan to take pictures. And he saw both the beauty of Taiwan's natural areas and then the destruction that was happening quite fast as they were clearing mountaintops and dumping garbage in illegal places and making highways through mountains that loosened the structure. So during earthquakes and there would be landslides and then the tornado, not tornadoes, typhoons, right? And then there'd be very bad destruction and all kinds of things, the fish farms and so anyways, he felt such a strong passion he said if people could only see this, they would care and they would change. So he quit his job and he got up enough money to buy a special aerial film camera and then he started on this many-year journey to film this thing, and it's not sanctimonious at all. It just shows you what he saw, and it was very, very touching. And to me, it felt like this was a person who really had a conscience and really wanted to make a difference, and it made a huge splash. I mean, the whole I think government people and schools, everyone got involved in going to look at these places and trying to make changes. Hopefully it will come to the rest of the world, because actually Taiwan is not that bad in terms of environmental protection compared to maybe some other places like some parts of the US. They actually recycle like 80% of all their garbage and industrial waste. But there's a very tiny country, so they have to really work hard to protect every piece of beautiful land. Yeah. Okay. So let's transfer the merit. And maybe everyone can transfer to all the things you would like to. And we can also pray for some rain. That's also very important. And also everyone can do your best to save water. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Sorry, was there any announcements that you need to make? It's okay. So now we'll do the 3 bows.